Hello, YouTube. So I want to make a quick video just helping people but with just finding their pedigree because that's something that I think is universally a problem or an issue that people run into is not knowing what pedigree mods to take, not knowing what's good for their build. So I'm just gonna do an example of a new build that I'm gonna be making this season for myself and how I run through the planning of the pedigree. So the new build, all that you need to know is it's going to be a Spellburst Searching Inspiration build. It's going to be a Searching Inspiration Spellburst Chain Lightning build, and it is going to be a deck stacker. So our core uniques that we're going to be using is Searching Inspiration. We're going to be using Searching Inspiration, and we're going to be using Ralph's Journey. I don't care about Ralph's Royal, I'm only using Ralph's Journey. And on top of that, I also want to make this a Verdant Steps build. So what I will be doing is making a Vorax item using Verdant Steps. So the core things, so let's write everything down, okay? Here is the core of what we need to know about this build. We are deck stacking. It is a Spellburst CL. And lastly, it is Verdant Steps, so it's mega stacking, okay? So with that in mind, I'm going to now work through the process of figuring out what counters do I want. So let's start at the back. Because we're playing a spell-based build, because it is Spellburst, which means it's spell-based, and we're playing Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning has a very nice property of being both an int and dex skill. So very early on, before you have any Ralph items, or any deck stacking items, there's a decision you have to make between going Goddess of Knowledge or going Goddess of Hunting, as both of these trees are quite good for spell-based builds, especially Goddess of Knowledge is centered on spells. So the very first decision I'm making is what tree am I going to play. Now, because I'm deck stacking, I'm actually putting a lot more weight into the power of Goddess of Hunting for two reasons. The first is that you can get these dex nodes, which is just, this is just free movement speed. It also has access to movement speed on kill, which I do plan on making a map blaster bolt, so I do prioritize this quite heavily. And then lastly, it has access to hasten, and as I'm using Ralph's Journey, I will not have access to hasten otherwise, unless I get hasten on a Vorax base affix. So with my first tree being locked in to Goddess of Hunting, automatically my next tree is going to be Assassin. If you play Erica 2, you just always take Assassin. It's not really a choice you can make. Then I have access to two more trees. Now, another tree that I'm very interested in and that I will be taking is going to be the Magister tree, because it actually gives access to quite a very interesting thing for Searching Inspiration builds. The play save got recently changed, where essentially all of your cast speed applies to burst short, spell short speed. This has always been a thing, but then recently they also made it that you have minus 33% additional spell short speed and plus 40% additional hit damage for skills cast as spellburst. Now, the spellburst short speed simply does not matter for our build. Surging Inspiration does not care about spellburst short speed. We are not charging spellburst. We're using the Surging Inspiration to trigger our spellbursts. So this is essentially just a 40% additional, which is a very, very strong talent choice. And this tree overall is a very, very strong choice for a spellburst build because it gives us access to one, Focus Besting Generation. It gives us access to ES on Defeat, which is very, very nice to have. It gives us Spell Crest per stack of Focus Besting, which is not the most insane thing. We're not a Focus Besting stacker, but it does add a lot of value to Focus Bestings, and it can be something we look for in our slates, for example. And it gives us Frail on Spell Hit, which is just a very easy source of Frail, which is very nice to have. So overall, it's a very solid tree with a 40% major node. It's a no-brainer to pick this, I think. Then lastly, for our last tree, so here's one that might be a bit weird, because if you're doing a Verdant Steps build, generally you want to go into Alchemist to get Source. But what I'm instead going to be doing is I want to abuse the fact that Vorax items give us easy access to base ailment damage, and how just absurdly powerful base ailment damage is this season due to the buff to Dirty Tricks. So a recent change they made this season is they made it that their tricks, instead of giving 6% additional hit damage for every ailment on the enemy, it gives 12%. Now, for reference, there are 5 unique ailments that you can have on an enemy at a time. I'm unsure if Frostbite and Freeze count as like the same thing, but we either way will not, or if it's like separate ailments. I think it is now separate ailments. But regardless, our build will not have Freeze. We will not get 200 Frostbite rating regardless. But getting Trauma, Ignite, and Wilt on an enemy is as simple as just having base ailment damage, as well as some ailment chance, which we can get through the Warlock tree. And then both Frostbite and Numbed, we do Numbed just naturally, that is the point of Erica 2. And Frostbite is very easy to get, because we have, all we need is either a site that says, like, when you deal frost damage, it applies Frostbite. Or we can use, like, Honor of Thunderspike, for example. We can do a setup like this. Oh, I don't know if Thunderspike could. But we can do a setup like this, where we use Glacial Freeze and Added Cold. Now, if we do have base ailment damage, I don't think we need the Added Cold. Just Glacial Freeze will be enough. But what this says is inflicts Frostbite when the sports go hit deals cold damage. This is a cheese that I've been using to generate my focus blessings on every build. But for this build, it's specifically just going to be helpful for getting a tiny bit of extra single target damage for like any big target that, you know, we're not just instantly killing. And then the reason why I want to go into the Warlock tree is, outside of Dirty Tricks being such an extremely powerful talent, the tree in of itself is actually just very, very powerful. We gain access to Paralyze, which is a very easy source of Paralyze. We have a generic 8% more damage multiplier. We gain access to Slow, which, honestly, being able to slow enemies does just feel really good. Once you get like to super endgame, there are going to be enemies that you don't one-shot. You will hit them for 3 trillion every single tick, and they will just take a bit to die. Being able to slow them is just a very strong defensive layer, and it feels quite nice. We're able to get access to blind and critical strike damage for negation. One of the strongest mods in these phase is rolling crit mods, especially if you roll double crit mods. And then lastly, you know, blur's kind of just whatever, but most likely in this type of tree setup, you would try to get like a 3x4, for example. So when you have prisms, you can roll mods on the prisms like 4x3 or 3x4. And if you have a 4x3 or a 3x4, you can use that in the Warlock tree to put it down here and then get access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ledger nodes. Or 1, 2, 3, actually, sorry, you would put the other one. I think a 4x3 would not work. Let me check quickly. Let me check. Yeah, a 4x3 would not work with the Warlock tree. Although a 4x3 would actually work in the Arcanist tree to get 6 legendaries. But the Arcanist tree is a very, very strong like option for using a... Actually, no, you would use an inverse image from an Assassin, and then you would most likely either use a 4x3 in the Arcanist tree, or another strong option is a Warlock tree. But overall, the Warlock tree is a very strong offensive tree. It gives us a lot of just percent hit damage, which is quite nice to get. And it gives us just access to a lot of like nice conveniences, like slow, blind, paralyze, just a lot of checkboxes So that's decisions that I'm like making with the build. Now, with all of this in mind, this is actually a build about pedigrees. How do I take all of this into mind and then choose my pedigrees? So as a given from the build, we have access to either Impermanence or 3 times the Charm. We have access to Rush or Steady Accumulation. I will need to like test around Steady Accumulation to see how bad the -3% skill effect duration is. We have access to Assassin's Conductive, but this is worth noting because we're doing a deck stacker. Queer Angle is actually very, very powerful for the build. It is roughly a 33.3% more multiplier. So this could be something that we could also consider in the pedigree choice because it's just very powerful. And similarly, we can also get Conductive from the pedigree and then choose Queer Angle. We have access to Dirty Tricks. and no other option in this tree is like really good. We don't want anything else. We have access to play safe for the 4% additional. And the only option that's like really competitive at all would be Bunch, but it's just kind of a whatever pick. It's not something that's super strong that I would prioritize. That is more of a fallback pick. So how am I going to go about making my pedigree choice? So the first thing that I do, that I always do, is I just go onto TLDB. I go Euro, Talent, 4 talent notes, and I just start scrolling, and I just start rating. So a lot of these talents, especially the first ones, are just not going to be relevant, because these are like God of Might. A lot of them are like based on attack builds, this is attack damage, attacks eliminate. We're not nasty missing sacking, this is additional attack damage, etc. Attacks inflicts paralysis. Now remember, builds in Torchlight are split up between either being spell or attack. Now, how do you know what type of build you are? How do you know what your skill does? Rain of Arrows, it quite clearly has these tags. It says attacks. So anything that is attack is going to scale Rain of Arrows. If you have Chain Lightning instead, it is a spell. Anything that says spell is going to scale Chain Lightning. These tags tell you all the information you need to know about every skill in the game. If you're ever confused about whether or not something works or something, just look at the tags. The reason why we can do Gale with Rain of Arrows is because Rain of Arrows has the projectile tag. We cannot do Gale with Chain Lightning because it does not have the projectile tag, but a skill like Tangle that is also a spell, we do Sparkle. A skill like Sparkle that is also a projectile, that is also a spell, has a projectile tag, so Gale works on it. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on the website, I'm going to scroll through, and I'm going to look for things that make sense in the build. So the first one that makes sense is Third Time's a Charm and Impermanence, because both of these are like, I think, pretty solid options in Goddess of Hunting. But I would group these as like fallback choices. I don't think these are like the absolute strongest of strongest options. I think these are just okay options. What do I think is strongest of strong? If anything is more than 30% additional, I think that's like a top tier option. Especially there are some setups that if you just do a bit of working around with it, it can be like a 4% additional. Take saves 4% additional. Keep it up is like 56% additional. There's some insanely powerful maintenance with like slight downsides that you just have to play around. So I would put these in a separate condition group. This second condition group would be my backup options. Now, I'm not going to do it for this video because, I'm going to list 20 fucking options then. But that is something you should definitely do for yourself, especially if you're on more of a budget and you're trying to like find cheaper options. For my build, I don't really care. I'm just going to buy whatever expensive pedigree. So then I'll keep going through everything. And then the first time that I'm going to see something that's like makes a lot of sense to me is going to be Poison Relief. I'm a big believer in injury buffer. I think it's an extremely strong defensive layer. It makes a lot of sense with a Mega Stacker to have injury buffer, because this injury buffer, like while you're slowly losing your life during the injury buffer, your Frost Magus is going to be healing you up and like taking you back to full HP. So that just feels very strong. The second option is, I already mentioned this before, Queer Angle and Conductive. Queer Angle is a 33% more multiplier, like 33.3% roughly. So it's a very, very strong option. Now, this is like one that's kind of interesting. You can consider Beacon, because you do need Beacon somewhere in your build, or you need at least 2 stacks of, you need 2 spell bursts. Now, there's a few ways to get 2 spell bursts. The first way is to craft it on your neck as a ultimate mod to get Beacon. The second way is actually to go into the Magister tree, which is a tree we're already going into, and putting an inverse image on this slot. If you put an inverse image on this slot, you can take this +1 spellburst node, as well as take it here again at the very start. You could also put it here to then gain access to like restore ES on defeat and stuff like that. But because these like Swabber's short speed nodes are completely dead to us, we want to put it on this node specifically to get +2 spell burst. I don't like that idea though, because we are doing a dex stacker. So ideally what I want to do is I want to have my inverse image be over here so that I can take these dex nodes here and again up here and get the maximum value out of my dex nodes. So with that in mind, I already added queer angle, and I'm also going to be adding conductive because, you know, conductive just makes sense to add. So we're not going to... beacon is a semi-decent option. What you need to consider, what you need to think about when, you know, deciding whether or not you need beacon is by looking at your neck and looking at what you can craft on the neck. So in other words, is the option that you're going to use to replace the neck with better than a 30% more damage mod on the pedigree? What I mean by that is, if we have beacon, for example, instead of beacon, we could have +3 active skill levels. How good is +3 active skill levels? Well, that's just 0.8 to the power of 3. So that's a 26% more multiplier. Now, I personally would rather just have beacon than have these +3 active levels, if that's the case. So this is a 26% multiplier. So because of that reason, beacon would just go into like the back burner for me. You know, it is an alternative fallback option that I have in the build. Inside 30% additional, pretty clear cut. It passes the bar. It passes the check for me. And we're just gonna keep going through everything and figuring out like what's our backups, what's not our backups. Bunch, for example, I think is a very strong backup. Bunch says you get 3% additional spell for stack of focus blessing. So just by taking this node alone, nothing else, you then instantly have 18% additional. But as soon as you like get focus blessings on your slates, this becomes like 24% additional, 27% additional, etc., depending on how many focus blessings you have. And that can also then be an incentive to get focus blessings, for example, on your wands. Penetrating is another very interesting one. So just baseline penetrating is going to be 30% additional times 8% additional. So it's 1.13 times 1.08, which is only 22% more multiplier. But if you actually go and you get yourself a Goddess of a Knowledge slate, and you roll it into the micro talent, that gives you this. Adds 2 to 2 fire damage, adds 1 to 3 lightning damage, adds 2 to 2 cold damage. All of a sudden, you're applying all 3 infiltrations, and you're getting 8% additional per infiltration. So you end up with a 1.13 times 1.24, which is a 40% more multiplier. I think that's an extremely powerful option, and I personally would like put that on the list, because in general, for this for like a Swabber's build, Goddess of Knowledge slates are like not too bad. You know, you can get double focus blessing from Goddess of Knowledge. You could get Swabber's from Goddess of Knowledge, which then could be like a let me explain that quickly before I yap too much. So I mentioned before that like that the Elementalist tree, the Magister tree, is a pretty good option for having a prism in it, right? Because like if you put it, for example, here, you get access to this legendary medium, legendary medium, legendary medium, legendary medium, legendary medium, etc. An option that you can do is to get one that is like legendary medium nodes can ignore the prerequisites, and then you just pop it down like over here, for example. And then you get like a 3x4, you pop it down here, and you can take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 legendary medium talents, and you can ignore all the prerequisites, so you don't have to take these bad Swabber short speed nodes. And if you were to do that, you can get +1 Swabbers from your slate or your Gods of Knowledge slate, and all of a sudden, God of Knowledge has a lot of value. So that is something that you actually have to build your character around. That is something you have to consider. But if you do put the effort in to build around it, then you will be rewarded for it. Translucent is good if you're playing like Jammer 1. If you're playing a build that does like conversions, it's really good, especially like G1. But it doesn't really make any sense for Erica 2. And then we're just gonna keep going through everything. Also, hello. So Keep It Up is another one that's like has a downside, but it's very, very powerful for the downside. So the downside of Keep It Up is you lose 200% crit rating, but in turn you get 56% additional because you get this buff. It stacks up to 8 times. It'll keep flipping between like 7 and 8 times. And this is 56% additional. Very, very powerful. That's just an easy added for me. You get 25% additional times 3? Yeah, you do. It's very powerful for G1. But like we're not converting with an Erica 2. We can't, unfortunately. There's no way to convert cold to lightning and fire to lightning. There's like no conversion where everything ends up lightning and you need to end with lightning. Okay, and then going through everything. We're now like at the point where Lofts and no-show or just like whatever. Just a note, impending is technically 30% additional. I just don't care. I'm not within 10 meters of enemies. Full defense is actually very, very powerful if you're using a shield. But we are going to be doing double wanding. We don't need full defense. We don't need a shield. Because we are doing verdant steps, and that's going to be our defense layer. Holiness is another very good defensive option. This also then fixes your curse immunity. Instead of needing curse immunity through Kismet, you can get Holiness. I think that is like a solid enough reason to add it. And then I think the last thing that we're going to be seeing here is Source. Again, we're mega stacking. We will need Source somewhere. So this is like our cream of the crop. These are like the best of the best talents for like the build that I want to make and the content that I want to do. So what we're going to do next is we're actually going to go over to the NPC. There's just a Mina NPC, or even better, if you have any like aromatic materials in your inventory, you can just right click it. Little trick that I learned this season, which I knew earlier. We're gonna just put it on Eternity. We're gonna go core talents. So now, with my list in mind, I'm going to scroll through these core talents and look like what options I have here. Because, we mentioned Holiness. We can just get Holiness on a belt. We can get Poison Relief on a belt. We can get Source on a belt. And it's really important to go through this and actually like look at what options are on a belt and which aren't. Because it's going to help you make informed decisions. We can get Crit Angle on a belt. So we pretty much have all like good defensive and offensive options. So when we actually make the build and we decide like, oh, I want a bit more defense. Oh, I want more damage. My damage feels a bit lacking. I'm not quite hitting damage cap of all these DRs and stuff. Where we can have leeway with our belt. So with that in mind, let's just end it and see what pops up. Just straight off of the back, queer angle penetrating, really good pedigree for the build. I don't like this minus 12% elemental damage, but other than that, it's like, not the worst. But you're gonna see like cheap pedigree. Cheap pedigree. This is Holiness. It is a defensive one. Just for the sake of the video, I'm gonna look up only no, whatever. I'm just gonna leave the cheap ones in with like a defensive mode. But we'll just ignore them, because, you probably want damage, damage. Everyone just wants damage. We already found like a really cheap double mod pedigree that would like work for the build that I'm doing. But now, you know me, like I don't just want like a 2 mod pedigree, I want a 3 mod pedigree. So let's see if there's any others like a 3 mod. So this right here is the mod that I was talking about that is like really good for penetrating. But unfortunately, this is source and queer angle. If this was instead of queer angle, if this was penetrating, like I would think that's like a 3 mod pedigree. Let me actually do a quick check though. Can you get penetrating on a belt mod? Nope. There is no penetrating on belt mod, unfortunately. So that like angle of attack is not really an option available to us. And again, the reason why I'm putting so much value on penetrating specifically is because it's a 40% additional. But not only is it a 40% additional, it also opens up 3 talent points because we no longer need to take a lightning infiltration from the assassin tree. So opening up 4 talent points is like really fucking nice. We want to do that as frequently as possible. Let me go through all of this and just like favorite like any 3 mod ones I see. Here's a 3 mod one. Source Holiness. This is like perfect for like map blasting. Gives you the source, it gives you curse immunity, and it gives you just movement speed. That's just like a, you know, set in stone map blaster mod pedigree. This is another one. It's 30k. I'm not spending 30k for poise relief conductive, but like this is an option. Even if it is an overpriced option. This doesn't matter because we are gonna be ES based. Another mod we can also look out for is a purple Origin of Magus effect mod. Since we are technically Mega stacking, that is an option. This is a pretty interesting one. Like this is let me move on model. This is not like necessarily a 3 mod pedigree or even a 4 mod pedigree. The block ratio obviously does nothing, so it would be a 3 mod. This is not exactly what I would say is a, you know, a 3 mod pedigree. But this immediate substantial charge upon like entering low initial, that is something where it's like I could couple that with my defense layers somehow. But I just think for this build, especially of like Frost Magus, it just doesn't do anything, so I'm gonna pass over it. But like that's something I consider, especially early on, is like how is this gonna improve my quality of life? How's it gonna make my gaming experience like better? I mentioned this, I saw this one before, but I'll just mention again. Swords can keep it up to like offensive mods, really strong. I mean, Swords is just like a mandatory mod, not offensive or defenses, we just need it in the build. And I guess plus 1 spell burst, which this is just has a lot of potential in it. I'm not sure if I mentioned in the video yet or not, but you can do the prism tech to really get value out of it. This is a good one, for example. Conductive, Holiness, and Mark. So again, this gives us Curse Immunity, gives us Conductive, which is like Square Angle, which is 33% additional from the Assassin Tree. And then we get Mark, which is 10% additional, or like 12% additional because of the Mark effect. Just pretty nice. This is like a very decent 3 mod option. Is any infiltration an ailment? No, it is not an ailment. And this build is using ailments. This one's really interesting. So this is 3k. It gives us conductive queer angle, which is dead. Okay, I didn't see the conductive queer angle. This is completely dead for us. But this inflicts frostbite when dealing hit cold damage. That, for example, I would count as a 3rd mod because that is still like, you know, that is something we want in the build. Now we don't need to do that. Now we don't need to give up Thunderspike links for this anymore. I can tell it's late in the league, because holy shit, these pedigree suck ass. They all suck ass, and just no one exists. This in any other build, I would consider a 3-more pedigree. Holiness for Curse Immune, Source, and then Focus Blessing Generation. But because we're going into the tree, the Magister tree that has Focus Blessing Generation, this is just not necessary. This doesn't do anything for the world, we just don't need it. I'm so sad about the fact that you can't get Penetrating on Belt, because this would be so good. Now, I do think there's another thing that I should say. Oh, this one's really good. This is a very good 8-more pedigree. Penetrating, which is 4% additional if we build around it. Source, which we need. So then we have flexibility on our belt and John between defense and offense, as well as armor damage mitigation, which is just generically a lot of damage. You know, it's just good damage for a spell burst, for a spell build. So something else that I will talk about quickly is our talent tree choices. The Warlock tree in particular in this build is not really a hard requirement. I think it's a very, very powerful build. It's extremely powerful to play around, which is why I want to play around it. Also, quick note, this is a 3-more pedigree, but this converts weapons of lightning damage to fire damage. That does break Erica too. We want to be doing pure lightning damage, so you cannot actually use this. Okay, so I went through everything. There's some 3-mode options, but there's nothing that like really like blows me away. Like, wow, that's really strong or powerful. You know, there's nothing like this pedigree that's just like absurdly out of this world good or anything like that. But what I will say, going through everything, is and if you go through all your mods and stuff and you don't find like a 3-mod pedigree, you can then start like also including your backup mods to try and get the 3-mod pedigree. A 2-mod pedigree of just 2 extremely powerful mods is also completely fine to do. Like, there's nothing wrong with doing that. But then also, you can look at your talent, your tree choices. So, I already explained Magister. I think Magister is too strong to give up. Because essentially, Frail is a 15% additional multiplier. Focus Blessing Generation is extremely powerful. This just baselines 20% additional damage. And then on top of all of that, you get ES like on defeat, which I value extremely highly. I think that feels amazing to play with. As well as you get Play Safe, which is 4% additional. You could like weigh the value of like that tree and then weigh the value of the Warlock tree. So the Warlock tree is a bit less stacked. You get Paralyzed, which is 40% additional. You get 8% additional from this. And then pretty much nothing else here is like offensive. It's like a lot of tiny defense things, which are kind of like whatever. Like they're not bad, but they're not like crazy insane. But Dirty Tricks, when you have it fully stacked up, is going to be 1.12 to the power of 5. So Dirty Tricks on its own is a 76% more multiplier. So like that's something you could look at, but I think in this specific build, the 2 options are just too powerful. No other trees can come close to Magister or Warlock. One tree that could potentially get close is Ranger. I think Ranger is a very, very strong tree. Ranger gives you access to Mark, which is 12% additional. It gives you access to critical strikes like elimination, and then gives you access to Keep It Up, which is 56% additional, as well as just giving you a lot of crit rating, as well as Agility Blessing Generation, which this is going to be 16% cast speed and 8% additional. The Ranger tree, in my like testing experience, is about double damage, and the Warlock tree is also about double damage. I think these two are very similar in value and strength. So like if I really want to like force the dirty trick setup where I'm like doing elements in the build because it's like, you know, really strong and powerful right now, I could then do Ranger plus Warlock. But this is also a part where I can consider like, what if we just say screw Warlock? Because not only is like Warlock going to force us into a base affix, because we need the added element damage, but then it also is going to consume a ton of points because now we need to put a lot of points into, you know, chance to inflict damaging elements. Our damage is not always going to be consistent because sometimes we're not going to inflict the elements. We need to put a ton of points into like getting to paralyze, getting to curse, getting to hit damage, just getting to every point. What if we just pick Ranger? Because we already have two very point-heavy trees. Magister is extremely point-heavy. You know, if I just quickly look at it, so this is 6 points to get ES, 6 points on crit, so we're at 12. Another 4 points here, so we're at 16. Another 4 points here, so we're at 20. Another 4 points here, so we're at 24. So we're already at 24. I don't even have my ES on the feet yet, so now that's 28. I don't have any cast speed, I don't have any like percent hit damage. I'm already at 28 points. And it's like this tree is one of the tree where it's like such a good target for a prism that the value from Warlock being such a good prism target does drop a bit. Because one of the strengths of Warlock is how good it is with a prism. Because if you put your prism here, you get just instantly 5 legendary mediums. And if you extend downwards, you get 6. Magister is one of the few trees where that's like also doable. Where you can also get like 6 legend nodes, mostly because there's 2 just next to each other. And then Assassin's excruciatingly point heavy, because not only are we using 7 points here for the dexterity, we're also putting another 7 in up here for dexterity, so we're already at 14 points. We need the initial 6 points to even reach this, so now we're at 20 points. And then we kind of just want everything at the end as well. Like Assassin's Drive tree where you can just easily throw 40 points into. So with that in mind, I think there is a universe where we just don't even bother with 3 tricks for this build. Even though it is a shame, because playing around with slow feels really good. Being able to slow the monsters is like so nice feeling. But it just isn't that impactful in the late game, as opposed to early on in the league. But yeah, that's like my full thought process. From start to finish of like, how do I end up with my pedigree? Which mods do I think are the most powerful? Which mods do I think are like pretty good? Any mod that's like in the 20 to 30% additional range is like just a backup mod. Where it's like, if you find that mod, if you find a pedigree of that mod, a mod you want, an extremely desirable mod, as well as like a third strong mod that you need in the build, you know, I would rather take that 3 mod pedigree over just like 2 really strong main talents. Because generally, like, a lot of the legendary medium talents are a lot harder to come by than it is to, you know, just like make up for the fact that like, oh, instead of getting 4% additional, I'm getting 30%, or instead of getting 35%, I'm getting 25%. A good example of that would be this pedigree. So the percent dexterity is just a very nice mod to have. It's very powerful. But this -4 to max life and energy shield, and you affect 1 additional num. This is a mod that is like way harder to come by, and it's very important for the build. It makes the build feel way better. It makes your num generation feel way better. It's very important. But yeah, that's great from me. This was just a fun rambling session. But I think it's like very like easy to understand information. I think it's something that a lot of people get caught up because it's very overwhelming. But when you just break it down in a step-by-step process, it becomes a lot simpler to do. I hope you guys have a lovely day further though. And I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye, YouTube. Bye-bye. Bye, YouTube. Bye.